I really love the cameo of Angela's dog in the background. Thank you for sharing that cuteness with us. This video was a great lead-in to the rest of our plenary discussion and our last event here at this conference. So we are going to be having a conversation on federal funding, policy, and resources, what you need to know. This conversation will be led by Amy Huffman, the policy director at NDIA. Amy's fabulous, so excited for you to get on the stage. The other panelists are Jenna Levintoff. Jenna is a senior policy counsel at Public Knowledge. Prior to joining Public Knowledge, Jenna served as a senior policy and analyst for the Workforce Data Quality Campaign at the National Skills Coalition, where she led the campaign's state policy advocacy and technical assistance efforts on state data system development and use. She also served as an associate at Upturn, where she analyzed the civil rights implications of new technologies, and as manager and legal counsel of the International Intellectual Property Institute, where she led the organization's efforts to utilize intellectual property for international economic development. Jenna received her JD cum laude and BA from Case Western Reserve University. In her free time, Jenna enjoys yoga, international travel, and experimenting with new recipes. Our other panelist is Rachel Lang. Rachel serves as advisor for international trade, competitiveness, and innovation for Senate Finance Committee Chairman Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon. In this capacity, she leads Senator Wyden's telecommunications portfolio, focusing on improving broadband access and affordability across the country. She is a graduate of Claremont McKenna College and a native of Maryland. Please join me in welcoming our panels.
Thank you. Very powerful. I have all the power now. Hello, welcome. All right, we're gonna have some fun. We know this is the last session of the full conference, and I'm really, really thrilled with how many people are here. This is amazing. So, first things first, thank you to our wonderful panelists for coming all the way here. Can we give them another round of applause? Thank you. Second, if you don't know Josh Mamura, now you do. He's our policy rockstar fellow, and we're so happy he's here. He's gonna help me be a judge for a little game we're gonna play. So we're gonna play policy trivia, specifically digital equity policy trivia. And I need 2 volunteers from the audience. Any takers? Come on, don't be shy. All right, so I am just like Gina. I will start pulling people on stage. So I need a hand in the sky. Knowledge. All right. And Dave's right in front of me. Dave, come on up. Did I mention there's prizes? Nah, now you wish you volunteered. All right. I'm going to show our panelists something really quickly.
Okay.
So the way this is going to work is each panelist has, or contestant, you're on a game show now, each contestant has a buzzer. Now, they aren't as loud as we wanted them to be, so when you answer, put it in the mic, the little microphone in the back. Yeah. Oh, are the mics on? There we go. Let's test it out. Dave, you want to try? All right. Josh is gonna, each of you have your own unique sound. Josh is gonna help me figure out whose sound goes with who, so who answered first. There's 6 questions, 1 bonus question. Winner takes all. Okay? We ready? Ready? All right, question 1. Oh, I should have written these down. All right. The American Rescue Plan Act created this program to provide, and you have to wait until I'm done asking the question. To provide $10 billion for capital projects that directly enable work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options in response to the public health emergency, including digital inclusion activities. That was obvious. Rachel?
The Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund at Treasury.
She's right. All right, 1 point for Rachel. Question 2. In their final rules for both the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund and the Capital Projects Fund, the Treasury Department requires that any internet service provider's broadband project funded through these programs must address affordability and participate in this federal affordability program. Ooh, that was Rachel.
The Affordable Connectivity Program.
That's right.
Rachel.
I'll be slower next time.
All right, question 3. What is one of the major changes the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act made to the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program?
That was definitely.
Josh says Jenna.
It decreased the subsidy amount from $50 to $30, except for on tribal lands.
Ah, good qualifier. So it's a bunch of things, so it could have been any one of these things, so she's right. It did.
Yeah.
It decreased the subsidy from $50 to $30. Good job.
I can do the rest of them. I can't read what's back there.
Oh, you want to just go ahead real quickly? What's the rest?
Yeah, okay. I cannot see what's behind me because it's too glary.
In the microphone.
We increased eligibility from 135% of the federal poverty line to 200% of the federal poverty line, added in WIC, took away people who qualify because they have lost their income because of the pandemic, and maybe I'm missing one.
Veterans.
Did we add in veterans? No, I don't think so. Can you give me a hint about the last category?
Oh, it's the COVID emergency plans. Took those away.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it lasts for longer than the pandemic. It lasts for 5 years instead of until the end of the pandemic.
There we
Oh,
go.
and there's a lot more money.
Something we all really like, right? A lot more money.
A lot more money.
All right, question 4. Name an element of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, otherwise known as BEAD, that addresses one of the core elements of digital inclusion. Jenna?
The BEAD program allowable uses are for connected devices. Is that what you're asking? Is that no?
No, but without looking, does someone else want to answer?
Well, I just looked.
I don't know the answer, so I can't say that. Sorry.
All right, we're
Dave,
gonna.
answer.
Dave, you want to
Dave, know the
guess?
answer?
I bet you can guess.
Steal.
Oh, well, I mean, it also, there's places like infrastructure for housing authorities and wireless systems like that that are included.
That one's going to Dave.
Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Straight out the audience.
Deploy affordable networks in low-income multifamily buildings. Good job.
Got it. I don't think I knew that.
The point is, there's digital inclusion in BEAD.
It was.
It's great. All right, question 5. We're almost there, guys. The Digital Equity Act provides $60 million for states to create digital equity plans. Once a state receives their grant funds, how long do they have to create the state digital equity plan? Knowledge.
Is it 180 days?
No.
Wah, wah.
I was rooting for you.
It's all right. I mean, just a guess.
It was a good guess. It's a great guess. Anyone else?
Is it a year?
It's a year.
Yeah.
Right.
360 days.
Right.
A
Yours
lot
will
of
be
other
done in
things are
180
180 days.
Yeah, well, you know.
A lot of things are 180 days. In fact, 180 days was the shot clock. So once President Biden signed the law the bill into an act, there was a shot clock of 180 days for NTIA to release the NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity, for the BEAD program. So, you were onto something.
Yeah.
I was on to something.
Yeah.
Not that answer.
All right, where are we at in points?
3 to 1.
Yeah.
3-1-1. All right.
It's, and all 311 systems should be able to answer questions about digital equity.
Yes! All right, question 6. This one's a bit of a doozy, but I believe in you. The Digital Equity Act charges states to create digital equity plans with a special focus on identifying barriers and creating objectives for closing the digital divide for vulnerable populations, or as the Act calls them, covered populations. The Act lists 10 covered populations. One of you, please name 3 of them.
Okay.
All right, Rachel.
Seniors, veterans, and folks in low-income communities.
Is she right?
30% AMI
Yep.
below.
She's right. All right, she might be winning.
Definitely winning.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's not a
Yeah.
close.
No one said I wasn't competitive.
All right, we've got a bonus round.
Okay.
Where will net inclusion be in 2023? No, y'all be quiet.
In person.
I don't know. Should we give it to him? I think we should give it to him.
What, Louisiana? Oh. Where? San Antonio.
All right.
Oh, okay. Nice. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
All right,
Thanks for having us.
So
Thank you for having us.
Rachel wins an NDIA sweatshirt. We will get you the right size. We have more. Yeah, hey, Josh.
It says with digital equity, we all win, which is very true.
Yes.
And for being such good sports, everyone gets a signed, autographed copy of our NDIA moleskin. Autographed by the famous Laura Breeden and the wonderful Angela Seifer. All right, let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for being a good sport. Thank you. Thank you for letting me call on you.
She's saying no.
We're going to take these.
This one.
Okay, I hope that was fun. But we really wanted to take some time and just recognize this moment. Y'all, it's been a wild few years, right? It's COVID. The last time we were together in person was in 2019. And I remember when we were there, Angela teased at the beginning, we're gonna try and get you guys some real money. Like real money. Today, we're getting that money, and it's more than double than what it was in 2019. So we have a lot to celebrate. Let's take a second to just be excited. All right. So a lot has happened in the last few years, and especially in the digital equity and broadband policy landscape. And before we dive into the Infrastructure Act, which I know we all want to talk about, we kind of want to step back and talk about the other programs that, well, no, Andy, I forgot his name for a second. Please don't hate me. I know you're watching. Talk about the other programs he alluded to. The CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan Act, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and all the various billions of dollars that have been appropriated to broadband and digital equity over the past few years. So for both of my wonderful panelists, what are some of the key programs the various COVID relief bills established that address broadband and digital equity, and how will their implementation impact digital equity?
I can start with that one. So my boss, maybe it's helpful to just kind of step back a couple of years and kind of see how we got here. My boss, Senator Wyden, has always been really passionate about digital equity, getting folks online, teaching them how to use their internet, and making sure they can keep being able to afford it. But for a lot of other folks, who maybe aren't as involved as all of you in this room, I think COVID really laid bare the digital divide in a way that people couldn't ignore. Kids had to be online for school, people had to be online for work, and people had to log on to access their health care. And I think we've all seen kind of the heartbreaking photos of kids trying to do their homework in a Taco Bell parking lot, and no shade to Taco Bell. But we as a country can do better. And so I think Congress was able to come together multiple times on a bipartisan basis and pass some COVID relief packages that went a long way in a lot of arenas. But I think obviously what we're here today to talk about is the broadband elements of them and the digital inclusion elements of them. So, I won't go through an exhaustive list. I know it's been a long couple of days. But some pieces that I think are really exciting for me and for my boss is, maybe starting with the CARES Act. There were $150 billion in coronavirus relief funds, which went to the states and local governments. And I think the key point here is these funds were made flexible so that states could use them for what they needed to. And some states use these funds for broadband deployment. In Oregon, they did that in many rural areas, as well as kind of suburban areas. And then some states use them for inclusion, things like devices and internet subsidies. And there's a lot of really cool work being done through these CRF dollars. I'll just give a quick plug for the city of Portland and their technology kits, which really helped a lot of vulnerable communities with access devices and digital literacy programs, and it's gone a long way. The next piece I want to talk about that I think was really important for my boss is skipping ahead to the Consolidate Appropriations Act. This was the bill that passed in the winter of 2020 to 2021. It was included over $7 billion for broadband, which now that we've passed $65 billion, doesn't seem like a lot.
But at the time.
At the time, it was huge. And it was a very important kind of down payment on what's to come. But I know we'll talk about that, and you guys have already talked about that. But the piece here that I think was really important was the emergency broadband benefit that Chairwoman Rosenworcel just talked about. I think it went beyond traditional subsidies and recognized affordability as what it is. The biggest piece, the biggest factor in the digital divide. And Congress said, this is important and we must tackle it. And so it was obviously a COVID-specific program that has been kind of updated and extended, which is great. But 9 million households enrolled by the time that the program ended. So that is certainly something to celebrate. And I will just really quickly say thank you to everyone in this audience and people watching virtually, because the outreach work that you all did and the education, the participation made this program as successful as it was. And it got people online, and it made a huge difference in people's lives. So, in Congress, we pass a lot of bills, but it's up to folks in the community to make sure they actually help the folks they're supposed to. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. And then the next piece that I'll talk about, skipping forward a little bit, the American Rescue Plan. Democrats passed this earlier this year, or now it's 2022, earlier in 2021. And it included additional broadband funding, but one piece that I think is going to make a big difference, and maybe already has, is the state and local fiscal recovery funds. Like the coronavirus relief funds from the CARES Act, the SLFRF funds invested $350 billion to give to the states and local governments to, again, use as they see fit. And the final rule about this program is a big win for digital equity, because it sets the eligible use of funds very broadly, so that states have discretion to decide where need is. It's not just they don't have broadband accessible at low speeds. Is it affordable? Is it reliable? And is it high quality? And anywhere where those needs aren't being met, these dollars can be used for broadband infrastructure. We talked about this in the game, but there is a requirement that finished products, the recipients do participate in the low-income subsidy program, so it'll also go a long way towards affordability. And beyond that, the dollars can also be used for programs that provide devices for internet access, as well as digital literacy, and including subsidies for the cost of access. And one more plug to the city of Portland. I think they're using some money from these ARPA funds to expand their technology kit program and help even more folks. So really good things here. I think.
Yeah. Rachel just told you a lot of things.
I spoke too long.
But that's because so much has been happening. I mean, this has really been an incredible 2-ish, no one knows time anymore. I certainly don't know time, but it's been an incredible 2 years. So I think the two other things that I want to touch on that Rachel didn't get to are the Capital Projects Fund, also one of our trivia questions, and that's a program out of the Department of Treasury, and it's $10 billion. And what is so great about the Capital Projects Fund is how many things money can be used for. So you can use the money to deploy broadband. And one of the things that my organization really appreciates about this money is there's a requirement that if you're deploying broadband, it has to be a high quality network. It has to have speeds of 100 over 100, so that in 10 years, when we are for some reason like holographs to talk to each other, the internet is still gonna work, and we're not gonna be like, oh man, now we have to invest more money in broadband because we didn't do it right the first time. The Capital Projects Fund is making sure that recipients, that the internet companies that are receiving this money are doing it right the first time. So I think that's incredibly important. And then in terms of digital equity, it says you're allowed to use this money to get people devices. And I'll probably talk about it later. I am obsessed with the fact that if you do not have a device, you cannot get on the internet, period, right? You just can't. And so I'm really excited that you can use the funds for that. And then additionally, if you're taking this money, you actually have to participate in the Affordable Connectivity Program. I think what a lot of people don't realize is the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program is a completely voluntary program. So internet service providers, they don't have to participate. And so the more that we have requirements for providers to participate in this, the more likely it is that every community will have access to this subsidy. Because right now it is entirely possible that if you live in a community that just has one broadband provider, as more than 30% of the country has, you may or may not get to benefit from this subsidy, and we really want as many people as possible to have access to it. So, I think that that's a huge thing that's going on. The other big thing is the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences got $50 million, and so what this money is for is libraries are able to use it for technical support and for devices. And I know we have a couple of libraries here, so you're probably doing really awesome things with this money, but I think it was a really important recognition of the role that libraries play in digital equity and digital inclusion. I think libraries are a cornerstone of our communities, and they're doing really great work, and so by giving them money to do it, Congress was recognizing the role that the libraries in this room and across the country play.
We love our librarians. Let's give a round of applause for our librarians.
My boss's mom was a librarian, so we definitely love our librarians.
Okay, thank you. That was super helpful to get a baseline of where we are, or where we were before IIJA. Other than a ridiculous number of new acronyms to remember, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, also gave us $65 billion for broadband and digital equity, the single largest investment in broadband and digital equity in our country's history. The way this is broken down, and you've probably heard this already, I apologize for doing this over and over again, but want to set the stage a little bit. So that $65 billion is going to be managed by both the NDIA and FCC in different pots of funds. The bulk of the funds are going to the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Fund, or the BEAD program. You'll hear that word a lot. Go ahead and get used to it. That's $42.5 billion for that program. That will be managed by NDIA. Then there's the Digital Equity Act. We're all excited about it. We all know about it. $2.75 billion for that. That will be managed again by NDIA. Then we also have the Tribal Connectivity Program, which is a continuation of that program that was started during the Consolidated Appropriations Act. $2 billion for that, also managed by NTIA. NTIA folks in the room, I know it's a lot of money, and I feel like, might be wanting to crawl under a table right now, but thank you for your work. And then there's also $1 billion for a middle mile program managed by NTIA to extend middle mile access across the country, which for folks in the room, that means that getting more middle mile will make last mile or the broadband to the households cheaper. So that's why we want more middle mile. And then there's the Affordable Connectivity Program, which again, a lot more money, $14.2 billion. When we started advocating for this last summer, we were like, can we ask for $5 billion from Congress? Is that too much? And then all of a sudden it was 14.2, so we're thrilled. It's amazing. All right, so that's where we are. That's what's there. And I wanted to ask you both, and Jenna specifically, what are some key provisions in the Act that you think will change the digital equity and broadband landscape for the better, and how will they do so?
There's a lot of components of this bill, and also the fun lobbying information is that we actually, I believe, initially did ask, all the advocacy groups asked for $5 billion for the Affordable Connectivity Program, and Congress all on its own upped that to 14.2. So cheers to Congress for that. That's like your fun history of the bill. It was very cool for us.
It was very cool.
That Congress is really, they recognize the importance of affordability and gave it just more money than we even dreamed was possible.
On a bipartisan basis, I might add.
On a bipartisan basis. So I think, one of the most actually historic provisions for me is a completely unfunded provision. There's a provision in the Infrastructure Act that bans digital discrimination. And that was renamed from what you may have heard of as digital redlining. So NDIA has done a lot of really great reports on this. If you haven't read them already, you should. But essentially what it is a lot of internet service providers will underinvest in low-income communities or majority-minority communities. And so what you'll see a lot is in an inner city, they will have slow DSL and they're paying, say, $50, $60 a month for that. And then if you go a mile away into the wealthier suburbs, they have way faster fiber for the same price or less, and that's if the low-income community has internet at all. It happens in a lot of different ways, but functionally what it means is that low-income and marginalized communities are left with far worse, if any, internet than their wealthier counterparts. And so on a bipartisan basis, Congress directed the FCC to come up with rules to prevent this practice. I think there's a couple really, really great things about this. First of all, this is going to be rules. Unlike this money for the rest of the program that will run out at some point, these rules are, forever, as long as the FCC chooses to keep enforcing them. So this will have, an impact for years and years in making sure that everyone, no matter where they live, no matter what they look like, is getting access to high-quality broadband. And I think that's extremely, extremely important. I think another thing that's really helpful here is the language is extremely broad. And what this has to do with the NDIA community is that there's going to be a lot of chances here for advocacy, both to prevent the FCC from doing something we don't want them to do and to encourage them to do things that we do want to do. So the FCC announced, I believe, last week or this week, I really don't know time anymore, that they have a digital discrimination task force. And the goal of that task force is to implement this digital discrimination bill and also just promote equity in broadband deployment and adoption. And so, the task force has a somewhat, I believe, intentionally broad mission. And the legislation is intentionally broad. And so what I hope that members of this community will do, and what I know my organization will do, is we're going to go to the FCC and really encourage them to think about every single way that low-income and marginalized communities are impacted through the internet. So that's more than just, do they have internet available that's slower, but do they get the same customer service as wealthier areas? Or do they get the same privacy protections with their data I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can imagine, and I would encourage you to think broad and encourage the FCC to do the same, of rules that the FCC can make given this broad legislation. I think the other thing here where there's advocacy is because it's so broad, the FCC, if they want to, can, choose to take a very narrow interpretation of what digital redlining is. So there is language in the legislation, and forgive me for getting kind of policy wonky here, but I think it's necessary, that says, internet service providers are not allowed to discriminate insofar as technologically and economically feasible. So a lot of that's going to come down to how the FCC interprets that language. If the FCC looks at that language and says, oh, but if an internet service provider can make more money serving wealthy areas, then it's not economically feasible to serve low-income areas, and then the whole thing is worthless. So we really need to be encouraging the FCC to, to really interpret this in a way that actually makes it an impactful piece of legislation. Other really incredible things here, the BEAD funds, the $42.5 billion, it can be used for broadband deployment, but it can also be used for devices and broadband adoption initiatives. The NTIA has to define what broadband adoption is, and so there's space here, and I hope that when we talk to NTIA, we will encourage them to take an expansive view of broadband adoption and include digital literacy and digital navigators and all of the things that this community is working so hard for. Of course, there is the Digital Equity Act funding, which I probably don't even need to say anymore because you all know it so well. But it'll allow your communities to plan and to, do devices and digital navigators and digital literacy and all of the things that your communities really need to get connected. And then the final thing is, of course, the Affordable Connectivity Program, which we've talked about a ton. But I think there's a little bit of space for advocacy here because if you are taking some of the $42.5 billion for BEAD, broadband deployment, Congress said, hey, providers, you need to offer a low-cost option here. However, each state can figure out what their own low-cost option is. And so each state can set a different price and different standards for what it is. And some states may set a plan that is $20 for 100 over 100, and other states might be $100 for 25/3. And so we're really encouraging NTIA to align this with the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's absolutely critical that low-income consumers have access to no-cost internet because they probably can't afford to have a copay with the reduced ACP benefit of $30 that might not cover broadband everywhere. Even if it does, a lot of low-income consumers, they don't have a credit card, they don't have a bank account. They're physically unable to pay a copay. And so if NTIA encourages or requires every state to have a $30 or less plan aligned with the ACP, then these consumers can get no-cost internet, and I think that's going to be really, really key for connectivity. So that's like the element of that I want to talk about, but Rachel might have more to add to it.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was a really, really good list.
Not too long.
Not too long. There's so many good things in this bill. We could talk about it for this entire panel. I will just add about the ACP that there are already 10 million households signed up for it, which is more than signed up for the EBB at its height. And those are 10 million households that otherwise would have to choose between, having internet or buying their groceries, or having internet and paying their rent. And so this is really, really critical funding. And that 10 million number can only grow as folks on the ground work with their communities to get them aware of the program and signed up. And so we're really excited for this. And I think my boss is looking forward to seeing the implementation of a lot of these programs. And like Jenna said, there's definitely room for advocacy here. I think for us, what we're really excited about the bipartisan infrastructure law is looking at it holistically and looking at all of these programs for what they are, which is a recognition that this country doesn't have to choose between deployment and access and affordability and inclusion and skills and all of these great things that you all have advocated for, I don't know, the past decade, longer. And we can do it all. We can do it simultaneously, and not only that, but we have to. And so Congress, provided the resources for this, and I think it's really special. And I think obviously, the resources are there now, and they will be coming. But the devil's in the details, and like everything, the success of these programs will depend on how much folks are prepared and engaged. And so we're really, really excited about this and looking forward to the future.
You're fine. Thank you both. Okay, doing a time check. I'll ask one more question about IIJA. Then we'll talk a little bit about what we think should be next, and then we want to open it up for you all for questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and start thinking about those, and one of my colleagues will bring a mic around. Okay, so we're going to skip the next question. But from your various perspectives, what can everyone in this room and watching online do to ensure the IIJA programs are set the U.S. on a path towards digital equity? So you both kind of talked a little bit about advocacy, but if you could give a bit more detail about what we in this room should be doing.
Yeah, I can go. That's a really good question. Thank you. I think a lot of people, I'll just talk about working with Congress right now. A lot of people assume that, staff and members know everything already, and I wish that were the case. But, we really count on folks in the communities that we represent to be our eyes and ears on the ground and let us know what they need so that we can work those into our policy planning. And I know, my boss, when he flies back to Oregon, on the weekends, he comes back with no shortage of ideas and things that people, in the state and on his plane need from him. So, I would say get involved early and often. If you're not connected with your representatives and your senators, reach out. Even if you don't have an ask right now, it's helpful just to, open those channels of communication so that you do have a dialogue when you do have something you need. And I would say the same goes for state and local officials. I think the work right now for the states is to get ready for that BEAD funding. And to start working to build up capacity among their staffs and their broadband offices. And obviously there's a huge variety and there's a huge scope of how prepared each state's broadband office, if they have one, are. I know Oregon has a great broadband office. They've been doing really good work. But I know, it ranges from like one person that also does electric and power and all those other things to a broadband office that has maybe 20 people. So, I think they're doing a lot of planning, and it would help to get involved now and, join their mailing list if they have that. Reach out and let them know that you are there to be a resource. And the same goes with the federal agencies. I think NDIA and the FCC are soliciting comments on how they can create the best programs possible in terms of implementation. I know NTIA has already received like 550 comments on its IIJA program, so that's really great to hear, and I'm sure they look forward to reading all of that and synthesizing it. So yeah, file comments with your organization or work with another organization that does, and I will say, I think the fact that you all are already connected with NDIA and in this room means that you're probably on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rachel is right. A lot of people I talk to are almost, maybe afraid to reach out to their members of Congress. They think that as a regular person you can't. You absolutely can, and you should. Like Rachel can attest, I mean, it is actually her job to listen to constituents.
It is. And it's honestly the best part of my job in many ways.
Yeah, I think the staff would actually love talking to people on the ground versus people like me who are in DC all day. So do them a favor. But you can, and even if you don't feel comfortable, a lot of groups do things like actions to Congress, and so you send out an email and you're able to upload a letter to Congress or to the FCC. Even something as small as that shows members of Congress where the interest is. Again, you guys are following NDIA. They have amazing policy recommendations, so to the extent that you need to learn the policies, you know who to go to. I volunteer Amy for work.
That is my job.
That is her job. So you have policy expertise at your fingertips right now. Of course, Public Knowledge, my organization, will be happy to help, with our policy suggestions as well. But reaching out to members of Congress, not forgetting about the FCC. NTIA is doing listening sessions online that you can go to and talk about how to implement. Even dockets, like the FCC, anytime they do a proceeding, they accept comments from the general public, and they can be as short as 3 sentences. I think they can be as short as you want. They could be 1 sentence, but they should probably be a little bit longer. So just don't feel like you need to be in the DC policy space to do this, and I think that's my biggest piece of advice, is you can and should be doing it, and everyone's going to appreciate hearing your on-the-ground perspective.
I think that's exactly right. Rachel, you were telling us about how Senator Wyden on the plane like kind of holds court and would come back to the office with napkins written down with like, this person doesn't have broadband, do something about it.
Yeah, or, you know, when he's driving to places in rural Oregon, he would let me know that he did not have service. And so, you know, these members, they really do want to work for their communities. They want to deliver for their communities, and part of that is making sure their communities are in constant contact with us so that we know what is needed.
Thank you. All right. So, while we all here are super excited about this $65 billion in the IIJA, and it is a humongous step forward towards achieving digital equity, we also know that it really is just a down payment on what's needed in actually achieving digital equity across the entire country. So I wanted to ask you both, what's missing from the IIJA and what's needed to actually reach digital equity?
I can start. For me, I think there's a couple things. The first one is implementing all of the money that NDIA and all the programs that FCC have. If these programs aren't implemented correctly, if, for example, we don't require states to build networks that are fast enough for the future, in 5 or 10 years, we're going to have to invest again, and that's not a good use of this money. So we really need to be careful when we're implementing, that we're, you know, having states do it right the first time and thinking holistically. Like I said, you know, some of that deployment money, it can be used for devices, but I think a lot of gut reactions of states is to use that money to deploy. And they think we can only use the Digital Equity Act to do devices. That's not true, right? So we need to encourage states to be thinking holistically about this money, because Congress intentionally made the money available for multiple purposes. And, you know, working to align the low-cost option with some of this deployment with the Affordable Connectivity Program is going to be really helpful. Couple other things that I think are exceedingly important. So what a lot of people don't know about the Affordable Connectivity Program is the FCC has to verify that you're eligible for the program. So they have to know that you participate in one of the programs that makes you eligible. And they actually have a fancy little database, and you can go and you can put in your name, and it'll be like, ah, yes, John Smith is a Pell recipient. However, it only knows that John Smith is a Pell recipient from agency or from data, like from certain places. So that was very ineloquent, but basically data about the relevant programs is spread out across the country, some at the state level, some with tribes, some at the federal government. And this system called the National Verifier doesn't have all of it. And so if it doesn't have data about your program, then it would say, hey, John Smith, I'm sorry, you need to go to your state agency and get me proof that you're participating in SNAP, and then you need to upload that to the database. And if you're applying for the ACP, you're probably not going to be able to do that. 60% of people don't actually finish their applications because it's too burdensome. You know, you don't have the internet. You may not have a car, you're working, you're raising a family, you don't know where to go to get documentation to show that you participate in a program. And even if you do know, then you have to upload it to a website, again, when you don't have the internet, or you have to mail it in. So if you don't have a car and you have to go to the library to do this, it's just it's too much, right? So people just don't bother. And I don't think we're gonna get participation in the Affordable Connectivity Program to where it needs to be until we start fixing some of these silly, wonky issues. And so, you know, to the extent that you know folks in state offices, encouraging them to work with the FCC on doing this is gonna be really helpful. The other thing, I said it earlier, but it's absolutely critical that everyone has access to a computer or tablet if they wanna get online. And more than one per household. You know, it's a stat, I think Digitunity, who's here, they say 11% of people across the country don't have access to a computer in their household. That goes up to 40% for low-income households, and that's not even counting the households that share one device amongst everyone in the family, which is forcing people to choose, does my kid go to school today, or can I do my telehealth appointment? And it's not an acceptable place to be. I think the average household right now across the United States has 14 devices. And a low-income household might have one. And we can't be treating low-income households differently like this. And so while there's a lot of device money in all these various programs, it's still done on a state-by-state basis. and there's no guarantee that states will use the money for that purpose. And so I think we really need a federal program to make sure that people have access to high quality devices and that they can get a new device, every few years as your device wears out or becomes, not good technologically, thank you. And making sure that you can have multiple per household. And so my organization is encouraging this at a lot of levels. There is legislation that we're working on with Senator Warnock and Representative McEachin called the Device Access for Every American Act. And that would create a voucher program to give low-income consumers a device. We've been working to get that passed in one of the big packages that Congress is working on, and so certainly support from this community will probably be helpful when Congress starts working on some of those packages again. There's also a bill called the Coves Act. It repurposes federal devices that are old, gives them to nonprofit refurbishers who are able to give them to veterans and low-income communities. Like, there's a lot going on in Congress, and advocacy would be really, really helpful. We're also trying to get the FCC to step in and do something here. So that's like one of the biggest gaps in my mind is just we can't close the digital divide until we close the device divide.
All of that is great. I think that's exactly right. The bipartisan infrastructure law was a historic step forward, and it has the potential to really move the needle towards digital equity. But the work isn't done, and I think we all know this. Congress knows this. The advocates know this. I think I'd like to talk about one piece of the puzzle here, and that's competition. I think beyond funding for broadband subsidies and funding for devices and things like that, I think, my boss, Chairman Wyden, believes that, Congress needs to take additional steps to increase competition in the broadband marketplace and bring down costs in the long term so that you don't need an ACP someday because you can afford that on your own. As long as communities have no choice between providers for their community, they'll have to suffer with more expensive costs and lower service. So we want to fix that. The FCC recently adopted important regulations to foster more competition for broadband in multifamily housing or apartment buildings, and I think this is important, and it'll go a really long way. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I can say something. So something that surprises a lot of people is that landlords will actually make an exclusive agreement with an internet service provider. So if you've ever lived in an apartment or condo building and you only can get one internet service provider, it turns out they were like working together so that you didn't have any other choices and you were stuck with what you had and had to pay however much you had to pay. So the FCC actually has outlawed this for some providers, but there's just tons of loopholes. Essentially, the landlords and internet service providers come up with any loophole they can. So an internet service provider will say, we're going to do what's called a graduated revenue sharing agreement. So the more people that sign up in your building, the more money you, the landlord, get. And so the landlord's like, I need to let other providers into my building to put their wires in, but I'm not going to because then I won't get all that money from whichever ISP I'm working with. And so the FCC actually just took some action here on a bipartisan basis, which I think is awesome, to say, you can't do these graduated revenue sharing agreements anymore. Or they'll have a marketing agreement and say only one provider can market in a building. And so the FCC took a lot of steps to basically say, landlords, providers, knock it off. We need competition in these multi-dwelling units. They still have a long way to go, but they're making really fast progress on a bipartisan basis.
And this is really important because more than 1/3 of Americans live in multi-tenant dwellings. So big kudos
or work in them.
Yeah.
If you work in an office building, that counts as a multi-tenant environment as well.
Great point. So big kudos to Chairwoman Rosenworcel and the other folks at the FCC for that. We think that's very important. Another piece to the competition puzzle is knocking down barriers at the state and local level to local solutions for broadband, like muni broadband or electric cooperatives. I think 3 out of 4 Americans supports these networks that are often lower in cost and higher in quality than their big counterparts. So we think it's crazy that certain states outlaw them. And my boss is a co-sponsor of a bill by Senator Booker that would outlaw these at the federal these preemptions at the federal level. And finally, this is a little wonky, but in Congress, folks are taking a hard look at antitrust and whether our country's antitrust laws are holding up in the 21st century economy. My boss has said that it is absolutely appropriate for these laws and this consideration to also look at other consolidated industries like healthcare and telecom, so that you have more choice, more innovation, and more competition in the broadband marketplace. I think this is something that the president has supported. He's been very pro-competition, and I think it's really exciting. And then 2 more quick things. We have so many ideas left. I think we need to do more to support network resiliency so that once we have the networks, they're not quickly destroyed in a wildfire or hurricane. Here in Oregon, we know a little something about wildfires, and we need forward-looking policies that make our networks more resilient so that folks can both call public safety officials right after a wildfire and then also not have to wait 8 months for that connection to be built back up. And then the last thing I'll say is a quick plug for broadband reclassification under Title II at the FCC and restoration of strong net neutrality rules.
Oh, and just for those of you who don't know, essentially what all of that means is the FCC can't regulate broadband. Kind of crazy.
Thank you both. Yes. I'll add one thing that's on our wish list, and I hope it's on yours too. Money for you all to do more outreach and engagement around ACP from the FCC. So that's another thing on our wish list that we think was missing.
I'm glad you said that, Amy, because that is something my boss has also been pushing for. The FCC has the authority to do this under the ACP, but it doesn't have dedicated funding. So that's something we'd like to see. We've seen the impact of your all's work, and we'd like to see it continue.
Yes. All right. We've got a little bit of time, but this has been wonderful. I would love to see if anyone in the audience has a question. Mooney Ray is available with a microphone to come to you. If you do, raise your hand. Please introduce yourself and say where you're from.
John Davis.
I don't know if it's on. I can't hear it.
Hello.
Yes.
Great. John Davis Petrowski, Detroit, CEO Action for Racial Equity. You mentioned the FCC having the ability to sort of enforce digital discrimination, which is great. In the act, did it say what the potential, how they would enforce that, or is that going to be something that is going to be decided by the task force?
That's a really great question, and that's something that the task force is actively thinking about right now. You know, I think they have a lot of options. For example, one thing the NDIA said is if you're taking some of this $42.5 billion of BEAD money and it turns out you discriminate, maybe NDIA should take that money back so that we're not using our money to build discriminatory networks. So there's a lot of different enforcement mechanisms that are available, and I think that's a really great one.
Hi, Kelsey Barrecidio, San Diego. This has been really helpful for us, for me. So I guess now that we have ACP, and if ISPs are gonna be doing low-cost plans, right? So what would you say to local leadership and municipalities in terms of why should they invest in digital infrastructure projects, right? Because they take a long time, they're incredibly expensive, they're very risky for cities. So why should they, or shouldn't they?
I mean, I can try this one first. There's actually some really interesting research, I believe out of Tennessee. There's someone in the audience that's done a report on this, Chris Mitchell. If he's here, he can probably tell you more later. But essentially, there's a lot of areas that have had, say, communities that build their own broadband networks, and that's amazing for economic development. They're able to bring in huge new companies because the companies obviously need good internet networks to function. And then that brings in more consumers and more businesses, and it turns out in the long run to actually be a great investment in their communities.
I would echo what Jenna said. I think research shows that these muni broadband networks are better in quality, lower in cost, and not only that, but they typically have better customer service because they're local and in the community.
Hi, Ryan Collins from Buckeye Hills Regional Council in Southeast Ohio. I know you mentioned the future-proofing of networks earlier, which I really appreciate. That's a huge thing that we advocate for in Southeast Ohio. Has there been discussions of adopting the USDA Rural Utility Services specifications when it's related to fiber broadband design and implementation. This way that there could be not only specifications for the speed of the network, but also the actual infrastructure. What's seen a lot in these programs is companies will use low strand fiber so that they can cut costs, but that fiber needs to be upgraded within the next 10 to 15 years. So I'm just wondering if there's been any discussion on those specifications coming up.
Yeah, I was going to say, so this is one of those things that I think the NTIA is going to be actively considering as they read through all 500 comments. I know that's something we suggested, is that NTIA work with things like the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Treasury, who all have their own broadband deployment programs and have, you know, specifications there. We suggested that NTIA align with those, but I think it's still one of those things that's under active discussion at NTIA.
One more question.
Dave Keys from the city of Seattle in the state of other Washington. So I just wanted to see if you could comment on the availability of some of the funds and the allowance for doing research into community needs and levels of technology access and adoption with the demand so much on data, if you could say something about that too.
That's a good question. Thank you. I think maybe I'll talk about, were you asking about planning funds?
Community needs assessments.
Yeah, more speaking broadly, I think that a lot of the pots of money provided for in the IIJA do have kind of a bit of money that is provided for in the beginning towards things like planning and data and mapping and things like that. So I think there definitely is encouragement for that type of thing. I will also say that the Treasury funds do have data and reporting requirements built in kind of throughout the programs.
And also in the Treasury funds, they are required, the states are required, or the internet service providers are required to talk with people in the community that they plan to serve with their new projects about what is affordable to them. And so that's a requirement with the Treasury funds, both the capital projects funds and the state and local. And then community needs assessment, my read, Amy's read, be very clear, of the Digital Equity Act is for the competitive grant awards, that those community needs assessments would probably be an eligible use under that. Just a quick reminder that the request for comments from NTIA didn't address that part of the program yet. So that is still going to be addressed in the future, and that's certainly something that we can advocate for as a community.
And a lot of these questions about specific use of funds will be addressed in the notice of funding opportunities that will be released in a couple more months.
Okay, so for folks in the internet ether, our fabulous Laura Breeden reminded us that there's another listening session about the Digital Equity Act that NTIA will host on the 23rd of February. We will be sure to send that out over listserv. All right, so with that, I would love if we can just give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you for being here. I don't know about you all, but it makes me feel like we're in good hands when Rachel is one advising Senator Wyden, and she won our trivia game. That means she knows a lot about this stuff. That makes me feel like we're in pretty good hands, right?
I think I would be in some trouble if I couldn't answer those questions.
So thank you both, and I think we're about to close out the conference.
I don't know that these three ladies made it clear that a lot of what we're all thankful for, they're to thank. Okay, folks, this has been an amazing 3 days. I was a little worried that coming back after not having been together and with the community growing so much, would it still feel like a community? Would we still all have that supportive, helpful attitude? And you do. I am extremely thrilled by that and appreciative of all of you. One of the people I'm appreciating is Bill Callahan, who is not here with us. He needed to stay back to help care for his wife who had knee surgery. So just want a big shout out to Bill. We would all not be where we are without Bill Callahan. Another person to thank, Gina Dirks. Gina from Ashbury. Gina, did I get your last name correct? Did I just mess that up? Is that right? Okay. Gina is from Ashbury, and she is going to take photos out in front of the step and repeat. So as you're leaving, she has her fancy camera with her. So if you want to get some photos from Gina, and then Yvette will take some with your phone so that you can post them. When I was getting my lunch at the food truck, the person in front of me, whom I did not know, said to the person he was with, whom I also did not know, "This conference has inspired me." That was awesome. What's next? You all keep talking to each other, keep talking to the NDIA staff. We need to keep learning from you so that Amy can keep doing all those amazing things she does, and the rest of the team can do those amazing things that they do. The listserv, if you're not already on the listserv, if you haven't joined NDIA, join. It's free. We do have a pay version. We call it subscribers. It's a way for us to, those of you who can afford to give us a little bit, to help us out with the services we provide, but otherwise we don't want to make sure we keep anybody from participating. Net Inclusion 2023 will be in San Antonio in the spring. We're so about planning in advance. We actually had all this planned 5 years ago. We also know where we're going in 2024. We're going to Chattanooga in 2024. Big thank you to my staff. Caitlin is a rock star. Can we all thank Caitlin over there? When you all note how smooth things went, that was Caitlin. Thank you to all of you. We exist, NDIA exists for you. So if we are ever needing to do something for you that we're not doing, you should tell us. Okay, so thank you, and safe travels home.